Have you ever looked at your paycheck and just wondered where that number actually comes from? It can feel like a total mystery, right? Well, today we are officially on the case. We're going to pull back the curtain on the economic forces that decide who gets paid what, and more importantly, why. Let's dive in.
I mean, this is the big question, isn't it? Why does a software engineer make so much more than a chef? Why does a top surgeon earn a fortune while a teacher's salary is, well, a teacher's salary? It might seem unfair, maybe even a little random, but there's a system behind it all. It's a market, and we're about to figure out exactly how it works. All right, to really get this, we have to do a complete 180 on how we usually think. We're so used to being consumers, the ones doing the buying. But when it comes to the job market, that's not our role at all. The entire game is flipped upside down. So check this out. On the left, you've got the product market. That's what we know. We go to the store, we buy stuff, we are the buyers, businesses are the sellers. Simple. But on the right, in the factor market, which is just a fancy term for the market for things like labor, the roles are completely reversed. Here, businesses are the buyers. And what are they buying? They're buying our Libra, our skills, our time. We are the sellers. So if businesses are shocking for our labor, what makes them want more of it or less? Well, it all comes down to this really key idea: derived demand. Think about it like this. Nobody wants to buy flour just to have a bag of flour sitting around. No, they demand flour because people are demanding bread. The demand for flour is derived from the demand for bread. It's the exact same thing with your job. The demand for, say, a video game developer is derived from our demand for new video games. Okay, so that brings us to the employer side of the table. If they're the buyer in this market, how do they decide what you're worth to them? How do they actually put a price tag on an employee? Believe it or not, it isn't just a guess, it's a calculation. And that calculation has a name: Marginal Revenue Product, or MRP. This is the magic number. It's the answer to one simple question. If I hire one more person, how much extra cash will that person bring into this company? This is absolutely central to understanding the demand for your work. Let's make this real with this workshop example. So they hire the first worker who brings in an extra $200 in revenue. Great. The second one adds $280. But look what happens. As they keep hiring more people, each new person starts to add a little less than the one before. The workshop gets crowded, people get in each other's way, and by the time they hire that seventh worker, that person only adds an extra $80. That's a classic case of diminishing returns. And this all boils down to one simple, ruthless rule. A company will keep hiring people as long as the money that person brings in, their MRP, is more than their wage. So would they hire that seventh worker for $80 a day? You bet. But would they pay that worker $81? No way. They'd literally be losing money on that hire. And here's what that looks like visually. It's actually pretty cool. That pattern of diminishing returns we just saw creates this perfect downward sloping curve. This line literally shows how much money each new hire brings in. And for the company, this curve is their demand curve for labor. It tells them exactly how many people they should hire at any given wage. Okay, so that's one half of the story, the demand side. But every market has two sides, right? So now let's flip the script and look at the supply of workers. Let's talk about us. What makes us decide to get up and go to work in the morning? Well, a bunch of big picture things determine the total supply of labor out there. The size of the population is the obvious starting point. But then you have something called the participation rate. Basically, what percentage of people are actually willing and able to work. And that's affected by everything from tax rates and welfare benefits to how many holidays we get. The basic logic, as you can see on the left, is pretty intuitive, right? Generally speaking, the higher the wage you offer someone, the more hours they're going to be willing to work. More money is a pretty good incentive. But this simple logic has a really fascinating twist. And here's that twist, over on the right. This is where it gets weird and wonderful. At a certain point, when wages get really high, the supply curve actually starts to bend backward. Why on earth would people work less when they're offered more money? Well, it's because they reach a point where they start to value their free time more than the extra cash. They can afford the life they want, and now an extra hour on the beach is worth more to them than an extra hour in the office. So we have the demand for labor from companies. That's all about the value we produce. And we have the supply of labor from us, the workers, based on our willingness to trade our time for money. It's time. Let's bring them together and solve this salary mystery once and for all. And bam, there it is, the spot where the supply curve and the demand curve cross. This is the equilibrium. This one single point determines both the going rate for a job, the wage, and how many people get hired to do it. This is where the value a worker provides to a company perfectly meets the wage that a worker is willing to accept. That's where your salary is born.
Okay, so that's the clean, simple model. But you and I both know the real world is, well, it's not that simple. Governments and other groups can jump in and change the rules of the game. And when they do, it can have some huge and sometimes really unexpected effects on that equilibrium point.
The classic example, of course, is the minimum wage. On one hand, the arguments for it are strong. You're increasing living standards, motivating workers, and maybe even cutting down on welfare costs. But on the other hand, the arguments against it say it can really hurt small businesses, might lead to fewer jobs or hours being offered, and could even cause prices to go up. It's a fundamental economic trade-off. Now, let's look at another huge real-world factor: income tax. When the government steps in and takes a slice of every paycheck, it basically drives a wedge right into the middle of our neat and tidy market. This graph shows what that wedge does, so let's break down the consequences. So what does this tax wedge actually do? Well, you can see it creates a gap. To get someone to work, employers now have to pay a higher wage, that's the top of the gap. But employees end up receiving a lower take-home pay after tax, that's the bottom of the gap. And what's the result? Fewer people end up working. So it's a triple whammy. Companies pay more, employees take home less, and overall employment in that market goes down. So, if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's that your salary isn't some arbitrary number. It's the equilibrium price set by the value you can produce and the supply of people who can do what you do. And that leaves us with a really critical question, especially today. In an age of AI and automation, technology is going to dramatically change the value that we humans can produce. So what will that do to the demand curve for our skills? And what will your work be worth then?